Great Pan is dead, gone, demonized, forgotten. They killed him without a sword. They simply turned away. Great Pan is dead, but the forests still whisper, the fear still rises, the body still remembers. Great Pan is dead, but the panic lives, and that means something is still watching. If you too kill without a sword, check out Pantheon, our brand inspired by myths, legends and folklore. We ship worldwide and are rated excellent on Trustpilot. Link in the description. He lived in the spaces we avoid, the caves, the ravines, the tree lines that feel too still. You feel him in the silence that lasts too long, in the instinct to turn around, in the breath that catches you without reason. A presence. Before cities, before gods with laws, there was him. Wildness made real. So what happens when a civilization kills the god of the wild? Pan occupies a unique space in the ancient Greek world. His worship predates the Olympians, the polished world of temples, civic festivals, or epic poetry, all of it. He emerges from an older stratum of belief, one tied to rural life, herding, and the raw experience of the natural world. He was a pastoral god, linked to the shepherds and flocks, but that title doesn't fully capture what he represented. Pan represented fertility in its most chaotic form. Desire without restraint, a landscape that didn't care if you lived or died. His domain was the untamed, uneven land where humans felt small. According to later myths, he was the son of Hermes and a nymph, although, like many rustic gods, his origin shifts depending on the source. What stays consistent is his hybrid form, part man, part goat. It was theological. It signaled that Pan stood at a boundary, the intersection of the human and the animal, the civilized and the wild. Liminal figures in mythology are always powerful, always dangerous. Pan was also associated with sound, particularly music played on his reed pipes. The sound of Pan's pipes could charm, seduce, or drive someone mad. It came from the land, from breath, from wind. It was tide panic, a sudden, overwhelming fear without an obvious source. Armies were said to be overcome by panic sent by Pan, scattering without cause, driven by instinct. This is where the influence goes deeper than the other rustic gods. He had a psychological reality. He was the name given to something primal in the human experience, the sudden realization that you are not safe, that your body has already made its decision before your mind understands what's happening. Pan's sanctuaries were often caves. His images were crude, sometimes little more than carved stones or small figurines, and yet, despite his outsider status, he was widely worshipped across Greece, especially in Arcadia, a mountainous region where he was believed to be born. Here, he was essential. But as Greek culture became more urban, more refined, and more focused on the Olympian order, Pan's role began to shift. He remained present, but increasingly he was pushed to the margins, still acknowledged, but less central, less understood. He wasn't destroyed, not yet, but the world was already changing. To understand Pan fully, we have to move beyond myth and into biology. His presence was physical. He emerged from those same primal instincts that govern how humans respond to threat, to silence, to the unknown. He is a personification of something older than religion, the animal brain's response to danger. Long before we built temples or told stories, human survival depended on instinct. The world was a place of risk, where threat could come without warning. Our ancestors lived in environments where predators were real, and the ability to sense danger before it fully revealed itself was essential. What we now call panic was, in evolutionary terms, a life-saving response, a sudden surge of alertness, a readiness to flee, freeze, or flight, triggered by the body's deep memory of what it means to be prey. Pan, then, is a manifestation of that biological threshold, the moment when the human mind gives way to animal reflex. His power came from his capacity to invoke fear without form. This terror came from an overwhelming sense of being hunted, of something ancient stirring in the blood before the mind could catch up. That experience remains with us. It still happens in the dark corners of modern life, walking alone at night, swimming in deep water, hearing a sound that doesn't belong. Even in places we know to be safe, the body reacts as if they are not. The heart rate spikes, the breath shortens, muscles tense, and we are no longer rational beings. We are something older, something reactive, something wild. Pan exists in this moment, in the body's response to them. He is the god of physiological memory, of inherited fear, of survival reflexes, of that unease that can't be reasoned with or explained away. His name gave structure to something that had always been part of the human experience, the sudden, irrational terror that strikes without visible cause. Even now, when we live far away from threats that shape those instincts, the systems remain. We carry them in our muscles, our breath, our nerves. Panic is evidence we once lived with danger, and Pan, whether worshipped, feared, or forgotten, was the name we gave to that knowledge, that we are not as far from the animal as we like to believe. Pan is a god of appetite. His presence stirs the body before the mind can intervene. He is lust without instruction, desire without patience, fertility without ceremony. His energy moves through the world in pursuit, immediate, unshamed, and exposed. This was survival. If the crops failed, people starved. If the herds didn't breed, the village went hungry. Fertility was a matter of life and death. Pan was called on when the soil was dry, when the animals were still, when the body needed help, remembering what it was made to do. His arousal was part of the world's cycle. His image, half man, half goat, reflects exactly what he is. Goats are creatures of stubborn vitality. They climb, roam, and mate with purpose. Their bodies move with urgency and confidence. Pan carries the same energy. His form is a fusion, a statement that instinct lives in the human body and doesn't need permission to ask. Pan's stories rarely involve conquest or domination. His desire is expressed through restless movement towards a target. He chases because his nature drives him forward. The nymph Syrinx transforms into reeds to escape him, but even this moment becomes part of his mythology. He takes the reeds and creates the panpipes, an instrument whose breathy tone reflects longing, wind, motion. Desire becomes music, movement leaves residue. The ecstasy Pan brings dissolves boundaries between pleasure and danger, between the self and the urge. His rituals involved noise, dance, and collapse. He was honoured through experiences that bypassed rationality, experience that reminded people they were creatures made of hunger and flesh. As the cultural world demanded more structure, Pan remained fixed in a form that would not change. He stayed where he always was, and eventually, those who no longer recognized that part of themselves began to look away. As Greek society developed, its religious landscape changed. The rise of the city-state brought with it new priorities. Gods were written into law, attached to calendars, given official roles. Rituals became formalized, temples became centers of political and social life. Religion moved from the hills to the polis. This shift favored the Olympians. Their stories could be taught, translated, and standardized. They became part of how the Greeks explained their culture to themselves and to others. Pan could not be used this way. His worship lacked central texts. His rites did not align with order. He remained bound to isolated places and personal experience. There was no reason to suppress him. He simply became less relevant to the world that was being built. This process happened gradually. As rural populations declined and urban life expanded, the kinds of gods people turned to began to reflect their environment. Farmers became citizens, shepherds became soldiers. The fears and needs of the population shifted, and with them, the gods who were seen as essential. Pan's presence depended on proximity. He was strongest where people lived close to the land, but as the wilderness gave way to roads, trade, and territorial expansion, the areas that once supported his cult either disappeared or were drawn into larger religious networks. The cave became a landmark, and the ritual became a memory, the god became a figure of the past. This is how desolation begins, with absence. the world changed shape, and Pan no longer fit with its lines. Great Pan is dead. The phrase appears in Plutarch. A sailor passing near the island of Paxi during the reign of Tiberius hears a voice from the shore. The great Pan is dead. He carries the message, it spreads, the words settle into history. By the time they are spoken, the world has already moved on. The gods of the hills and the caves have now grown quiet. The sacred now gathers around temples and imperial order. The sentence lands with force because it makes a deeper shift, a change in what human beings consider worth recognizing. Pan disappears. A presence once felt in the body is no longer given language. The boundary he once guarded becomes invisible. Fear is renamed. Ecstasy is pathologized. Appetite is controlled. The physical experience of the sacred is withdrawn from public life. The sentence survives because it speaks to much more than a god. It signals the end of a way of knowing, one based on closeness, instinct, and sensation. Pan vanishes. The body still moves, still aches, still fears, but no one explains it through him anymore. Great Pan is dead becomes a closing remark on an entire human register, the register that linked the sacred to what was felt, rather than what was taught. Pan was reassembled. His name lost its meaning, but his shape remained useful. The horns, the hooves, the grin, these features survived so they could be reassigned. Over centuries, the physical traces of Pan were stitched into the growing visual language of evil, rewritten. As Christianity expanded, it confronted some forces that Pan once represented: lust, ecstasy, terror, chaos, appetite, solitude. These experiences had been driven underground. The New World Order could not eliminate them, but it could redefine their source. The forces that once had a god were now given a culprit. The devil was built to explain everything outside the boundary of obedience. He needed to evoke temptation, disorder, disruption, panic, arousal, and Pan's image provided the perfect template. There was no official moment where Pan became Satan, but his features began to appear in demonological texts, artworks, sermons. What had once been sacred was now profane. What had once been part of life was now treated as a threat to the soul. Pan had never been an evil figure. He could be frightening, but he was never moralized. The fear he produced was natural. Part of it was meant to be alive. His sexuality was direct. His power was felt in the nervous system. But under Christian frameworks, every form of spiritual energy had to be categorized. Pan's entire domain fell on the wrong side of the line. The forest became a place of temptation. The animal body became a symbol of moral failure. Desire was severed from life and reassigned to sin. The act of demonization was conceptual. It allowed the containment of instincts that could no longer be acknowledged. Everything Pan represented became the architecture of hell, and that process had consequences. When Pan's image was folded into the devil's, the experience of being overwhelmed by the wild was no longer interpreted as sacred. Panic became spiritual failure. Lust became confession. Fear became vulnerability. The body became suspicious. The old reflexes remained, but they were stripped of language that could affirm them. Demonization served a function. It replaced relationship with rejection. The god who once startled people into presence now stood as a warning. His smile became deceit. His dance became seduction. His pipes became instruments of manipulation. And with each retelling, the space for his original meaning shrank. By the time the Middle Ages began to systemize evil, Pan had disappeared entirely from memory, but his shape was still there. Etched into bestiaries, painted in the margins of manuscripts, lurking in images of witches' sabbaths, nocturnal rites, and rural heresy. He crouched behind the curtain. It was distortion, a transformation that turned a god of instinct into an icon of punishment. What could not be sanctified was condemned. What could not be silenced was accused. Once the god is gone, the land stays, but it no longer speaks. Hills become elevation, forests become timber, the wilderness is measured in yield rather than presence. Nature, once seen as alive with will and personality, is reduced to function. Animals are stock, meat, units of labour. Their behaviour is studied, not interpreted. Their lives are managed, no longer honoured. The instinct they reflect are problems to solve or efficiencies to exploit. Desire is domesticated, ecstasy is medicated, fear is diagnosed. The reactions that once drew people into ritual and myth are explained away, monitored, suppressed. Nothing is asked of the wind, no meaning is taken from the rustle in the trees, a scream in the dark is treated as noise. The silence is sterile. A way of responding has ended. Trembling once carried spiritual weight. Hunger once aligned the body with the world. When gods like Pan were present, the animal part of being human had meaning. That part still stirs beneath the surface, but no one speaks to it anymore. The world once pulsed. Trees swayed with breath, fear had a shape. A man could stand alone in a field and feel watched by something vast, ancient and alive. The change came slow. Fields became boundaries, paths became roads, forests were measured, divided, sold. What once felt alive became scenery. What once needed ritual became noise. The animals were the first to fall silent, then the wind, then the caves. People still ran when afraid, still burned with lust, still wept without knowing why, but the meaning was gone. The trembling no longer opened a door, it closed one. Shame replaced awe, panic became failure, arousal became sin. The sacred left the body, the dance ended, and Pan was nowhere. The world still moves, but nothing listens, nothing answers. That is his desolation.